Arizona's water trap, the 20-year policy failure sinking the desert. Wide drone shots over Buckeye, Arizona. Perfect grids of tan rooftops stretch to the horizon. Palm trees line freshly paved roads. Billboards promise luxury desert living and smart homes for the future. At first glance, this looks like prosperity, growth, the American dream rebuilt in stucco and solar panels. Now, cut to Queen Creek, new subdivisions half finished, dirt lots where houses were supposed to rise, construction signs quietly removed, permits frozen. Because beneath this mirage, something essential is missing: water. In 2023 and 2024, Arizona did something almost unthinkable for a fast-growing Sunbelt state. It admitted the truth. It could no longer guarantee water for new homes in parts of the Phoenix metro area. In 2025, the consequences became unavoidable. Housing permits plunged, developers stalled, and a promise made more than 40 years ago officially died. This is not a drought story. This is not climate panic. This is a policy collision between 20th century water laws and 21st century growth. Tonight, on the Capstone, we investigate how Arizona built one of the fastest-growing economies in America on a foundation that is literally drying up, and why the bill has finally come due. Act 1. The Death of the 100-Year Promise. In 1980, Arizona passed what many experts once called one of the most sophisticated water laws in the world, the Active Management Area Act. Its central promise was simple and powerful. If you built a new housing development in certain regulated zones called active management areas, the state would certify that there was a 100-year assured water supply. In other words, water for every home, every faucet, every backyard for a full century. This promise fueled Arizona's transformation. Phoenix exploded outward. Suburbs like Goodyear, Surprise, Buckeye, and Queen Creek turned farmland and desert into master-planned communities. Banks financed mortgages with confidence. Cities issued permits without hesitation. Homebuyers never asked where the water came from because the state said it was guaranteed. But here's the problem. That guarantee relied on assumptions made in the late 20th century when groundwater was treated as a buffer, not a finite bank account. For decades, Arizona quietly filled the gap between supply and demand by pumping groundwater, massive volumes, far more than nature could replace. According to state data, over 27 million acre-feet of groundwater has been lost from Arizona's basins over the last 20 years alone. To put that in perspective, that's enough water to supply millions of households for generations. By 2023, the math finally broke. The Arizona Department of Water Resources released new modeling showing that parts of the Phoenix West Valley no longer had enough groundwater to meet the 100-year requirement. And suddenly, the unthinkable happened. The state stopped approving new subdivisions. No press conference panic, no dramatic announcement, just a bureaucratic sentence with enormous consequences. New developments could no longer prove an assured water supply. In early 2025, housing permits across affected areas dropped by roughly 20%. Projects were delayed, land values shifted overnight, and a growth engine that Arizona had relied on for decades began to stall. If you live in a fast-growing desert city, Arizona, Nevada, Texas, have you noticed new housing projects being delayed or canceled? What does it look like where you live? The promise that built modern Arizona was dead, and it wasn't climate change that killed it. It was policy denial. Act 2. The Geopolitics of Alfalfa. To understand the anger boiling beneath Arizona's water crisis, you have to leave the suburbs and go rural. La Paz County, western Arizona, flatland, open skies, and enormous green rectangles visible from space. alfalfa fields. This is where one of the most controversial symbols of Arizona's water crisis took root: Fondamont, a Saudi-owned agricultural company. Their business model is simple: grow alfalfa in Arizona, one of the most water-intensive crops on Earth, then ship it overseas to feed dairy cows in Saudi Arabia, a country that banned domestic alfalfa farming to conserve its own water. In other words, exporting Arizona's water embedded in hay. And here's the critical detail. In large parts of rural Arizona, there is no groundwater regulation at all. No pumping limits, no mandatory conservation. If you own the land, you can pump as much water as your wells can extract. So while suburban developments face moratoriums and homeowners watch their wells run dry, industrial-scale farms continue pumping billions of gallons legally. For nearby residents, the impact is personal. Shallow domestic wells fail first, water tables drop, families are forced to haul water or drill deeper at enormous personal cost. From their perspective, the system feels rigged. Foreign-owned farms get unlimited access, local residents get rationing, new homeowners get rejected permits, and the state? Caught between property rights law, international trade realities, and a groundwater framework that was never designed to manage globalized agriculture. This isn't just a moral controversy, it's a structural one. Arizona's water law treats groundwater as private property in rural areas and a public resource in cities. That split made sense in 1980. In 2025, it's a contradiction. Should states be allowed to export water-intensive crops during a water crisis, or should local water security come first? Because while alfalfa exports grab headlines, an even larger force is squeezing Arizona's water future, and it flows from 1,450 miles away.
Act 3. The Colorado River Impasse. The Colorado River is the lifeline of the American Southwest. It supplies water to 40 million people, irrigates 5.5 million acres of farmland, and generates hydroelectric power across 7 U.S. states and Mexico. But the river was overpromised from the very beginning. Its foundational agreement, the Colorado River Compact of 1922, was based on unusually wet years. It assumed more water than the river could reliably deliver. For decades, reservoirs like Lake Mead and Lake Powell masked the problem. Now they are exposing it. In 2025, the federal government officially implemented Tier 1 shortage conditions, triggering mandatory water cuts across the basin. And here's the harsh truth. Arizona takes the deepest cuts first. Why? Because of the Central Arizona Project, or CAP. CAP is a massive canal system that lifts Colorado River water uphill, hundreds of miles into central Arizona. It was built late. That made Arizona junior in the priority system. When shortages hit, CAP water is cut before California's senior rights. That means Arizona loses surface water and turns, once again, to groundwater. But groundwater is already depleted. Negotiations among the 7 basin states have repeatedly broken down. Each state defends its historical allocations. No one wants to blink first. So Arizona is trapped between 2 collapsing pillars, a shrinking Colorado River and groundwater reserves already drained to the brink. There is no backup left. Do you think Western states will ever agree to permanent water cuts, or will the federal government eventually have to force them? This impasse is no longer theoretical. It is reshaping Arizona's economy in real time. Act 4. The economic fallout. Water scarcity doesn't just dry up rivers, it reshapes markets. In Arizona, the first visible casualty has been housing affordability. When new construction slows, supply tightens, prices rise, rent climbs, and the cost of compliance gets passed directly to buyers. Developers who were allowed to build now face water offset rules, requirements to secure alternative water supplies or fund conservation projects to make up for groundwater use. Those offsets cost millions, and that cost shows up in home prices, HOA fees, and long-term municipal taxes. But housing is only part of the story. Arizona has spent the last decade branding itself as the Silicon Desert. Intel, TSMC, semiconductor fabrication plants worth tens of billions of dollars. These facilities are technological marvels and water-intensive ones. Chip manufacturing requires ultra-pure water, massive volumes, constant supply. State leaders insist that industrial water use is planned, efficient, and recycled. And in many cases, that's true. But perception matters. When a state freezes housing permits due to water scarcity, global investors take notice. Water risk becomes investment risk. If Arizona cannot guarantee long-term water stability, not just for factories, but for the workers who live nearby, the entire growth narrative weakens. The desert boom was built on certainty. That certainty is gone. Would water insecurity make you think twice about moving to or investing in a fast-growing desert city? And so Arizona looks outward, searching for salvation, toward the ocean. Act 5. The trillion-dollar gamble. The most ambitious proposals to solve Arizona's water crisis share a common theme: desalination. Ideas range from massive plants in California to joint U.S.-Mexico facilities along the Sea of Cortez, with water piped hundreds of miles inland. The price tag? Anywhere from $5 billion to $10 billion or more. And that's just construction. The deeper problem is economics. Right now, traditional Colorado River water delivered through CAP costs roughly $270 per acre-foot. Desalinated water costs closer to $2,200 per acre-foot. That's nearly 10 times more expensive. Which raises the final, unavoidable question: who pays? Homeowners, farmers, cities, taxpayers? Because once water becomes that expensive, the entire economic logic of desert growth changes. Cheap water made Arizona possible. Expensive water may make parts of it unlivable, or at least uncompetitive. This is the trillion-dollar gamble. Not just whether desalination works technically, but whether the desert dream still works mathematically. Conclusion: the desert's reckoning. Arizona's water crisis is not sudden. It is not mysterious. It is the result of 20 years of policy delay built on laws written for a different century. The 100-year promise wasn't a lie. It was a belief that growth could always outrun limits. In 2025, those limits are no longer abstract. They are visible in frozen permits, falling reservoirs, drying wells, and rising costs. Arizona is not alone, but it may be first. The question now is not whether the desert can grow, it's whether it can adapt before scarcity turns prosperity into a mirage. Is Arizona a warning or a blueprint for how desert cities must change? This has been the Capstone. Primary data sources include the Bureau of Reclamation, the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and the Common Sense Institute.